Have you ever hatched out the perfect plan for your life only to have those plans turned upside down? Today's guest shares how just when everything seemed to line up in her career, it all got derailed. If you're wondering if God is with you even in thwarted plans, you'll want to hear Alicia's story. Proverbs 19:21 says many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. And today we'll hear about how the Lord's purpose prevailed in Alicia's life. If you're interested in hearing more stories about extraordinary ways that God shows up in the ordinary moments of life, subscribe to our channel. Okay, Alicia, hello. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. We're so excited that you're here. I can't wait to I've heard a little bit of your story, but I can't wait to hear the whole thing fleshed out. And I think it's going to be a really awesome story for our guests. So Bria, do you want to kind of intro Alicia to us and to our guests and tell us about her?
Sure. I've known Alicia now for about a year and a half. She is the teacher at the school that our girls go to, and she and I have become friends. And our girls absolutely adore her. I adore her, and she's an amazing teacher. So her story today is going to be about her teaching career and how she ended up as the teacher at the school where our girls go. So I'm super excited because I don't actually know the whole story. I know parts of the story, but I don't think I know the whole story. So I'm super excited to hear it.
Yes, awesome. I mean, I think it's like a really relatable thing that sometimes we feel like we're moving in the right direction with our career and taking all the right steps. And then it's like all of a sudden things change course and God has a different plan. So I definitely can relate to that. And I feel like a lot of people can. So we're excited to hear all about that.
Yeah.
Before we get into that very exciting story, though, we'll share our God in the grocery aisle moments just for the week or, in the past couple of weeks. So, Brianne, if you want to start with that.
Sure.
Okay.
So mine's not very exciting, I guess, but I just had a moment yesterday, maybe, or the day before, I'm not sure, where I was actually driving to pick up the girls from school. And I was just like really struggling with some things. And I like switched the station on the radio or something. Like I must have switched the station on the radio, and the song that like came on, it was a Christian radio station, and the song that came on was just like the perfect song that I needed in that moment. And it's like millions of people around the world are listening to these radio stations, and so I'm sure there's plenty of people who that's the song they needed in that moment. But it was just one of those moments where you just feel like, okay, God, you see me, I hear you, I'm okay in this moment. And yeah, so it was just super simple, but a song on the radio.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is so often like a God in the grocery aisle moment that I could give. And I feel like, yeah, y'all are shaking your heads like you too. And I think there's probably a lot of people that feel that way where it's like he just specifically with like songs, like he just does seem to give us the ones that we need right at the moment that we need it. And it's just a small little thing, but it's always like very comforting.
Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure.
Awesome. Well, Alicia, do you have a God in the grocery aisle moment that you want to share?
Sure. I actually shared it with Bree yesterday.
Awesome.
Just basically, I had a moment that I was needed to have a conversation with somebody that was a little bit more challenging. And I was kind of like, okay, like I'll do it later. Like I'll see him next week. I'll put it off. I put it off. And so I was driving actually on Mondays, we don't have school, but I go in and prep and get everything done. So I was driving. I'd been dragging all morning and I was like, I don't know why I'm so tired. What's going on? And like, I felt like God just kind of nudging me like, hey, I need you to just go on and have that conversation now. And I'm like, but I'll see them later. And it's just that little nudge of like, just make the phone call, like, just do it. And I was like, okay, fine. So I had to stop off at Fry's real quick. So I was like, okay, I'll make the call real quick before I go in. And it ended up going super smooth, was super easy, nothing as big as I was anticipating it being. And like, just instantly, like I had energy for the day and just like felt totally like revitalized for the day. from just that simple nudge. And it's like, if I would have pushed off that nudge and just like pushed it off and been like, okay, you know, God's telling me to do it now, but I'll do it later. It's like, I know, cause I've done it before. And it's like that, like dragging feeling would have been all day. And just doing that, like the person that I called was super appreciative of just having that conversation and just like having it done and just taken care of was just amazing.
That's awesome. He
I
always knows exactly what we need.
Yes, I love that so much. And like again, it's so relatable because we all do that. It's like I'm so guilty of this so often. I like build these things up in my mind and then I like stress and stress and it drains my energy, it drains my joy. And it's like God is there saying like I'm with you. Do the thing. I am with you. And that's like a phrase that is like keeps being repeated in my life right now is like I am with you. He is with us and he's with you to have that conversation, you know, and that's so awesome that it went well. Sometimes it doesn't and he's still with us, you know, and so we can just have courage in moving forward with those hard things. So I love that. What a good reminder. Okay, well, I had a different one and maybe I'll quickly say it, but what Alicia said just like sparked this thought of wanting to say this. So there's a couple of people that I've really been wanting to ask to come as guests on the podcast. And like one of them, Brianne and I made a list back in December of people that we wanted to ask. And she's been on my list since then. So it's been months. And I've just been like, dragging my feet, not asking her. And it's been this thing that is like causing me anxiety and like I'm feeling really convicted and I'm still not doing it. And she's at my table at a Bible study that I'm doing right now. And the Bible study is called Take Courage. And it's literally about like having courage to do the things that God is asking us to do and like how to have that courage. And one of the things that is in the Bible study, it's about the book of Haggai. And it's talking about how when the Israelites came back after being exiled and they're supposed to be rebuilding the temple, they're like not doing it and they're focusing on other things. And God is telling them, you just need to climb the mountain, collect the wood, and build the temple. It's like those steps, so easy. And the author of the Bible study that I'm doing is asking, like, what is the wood that you need to collect? And it was like so convicting of like, the wood is the people, and I need to collect what he has put literally right in front of me at my table at Bible study. She's right there. And I'm not collecting the wood. I'm not building the temple. I'm not doing the thing that he has asked. And so after this last Bible study, it was like more about how to have that courage and how to move forward in the things. And so after Bible study, I texted her and another person at our table who just has an amazing story that I think will be so great to hear, and was like, okay, to one of them, I literally said, I'm collecting my wood. Like, I am asking you to come on the podcast. Like, if you say no, that's fine. But like, I need to at least do my part and ask. And it's like immediate relief, immediate, like the anxiety is gone, because it wasn't really about the doing of the thing. It was about the not doing of the thing that God had called me to do that I was having the anxiety about, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like all this fear of like, oh, what if they say no? Or what if they don't like what was all of that about? That was not even like, you know, just lies that I was conjuring up in my head. So yeah, your story made me think of that. How I didn't listen when he was like, just do it now. And I kept waiting. And it like made things so much more difficult for me. Okay, so I'm taking a lot of time. I know that, but I have to share this other thing that I was going to share at this Bible study on Monday. Last week, I guess it depends if we air these in order, but on a really recent podcast, I talked about how Jeremiah 1 was like something that God had put in front of me in multiple ways, multiple times, and how it was like so important to me. And at Bible study, where I'm with these women who I like needed to ask to come on this podcast, she spent the whole video, the author of the Bible study, almost the whole video talking about Jeremiah 1:5, like right from where I left us off with my on the grocery bill moment last week. There it was. And I was just like, this could not be more clear, but God is so good and so faithful. And like, you know, here's one more reassurance. to give you the courage to do the things that I'm asking you to do that you're not currently doing. So it's just like he's so good to us even when we are dragging our feet and not doing the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that is my long-winded to God in the grocery aisle moment.
That's awesome.
Okay, well, those were all great. Alicia, I'm so excited to hear about this. And obviously, Brianne said that Alicia is the teacher of her daughters, who are my nieces, who are like my two favorite people in the whole world. So, like, you have a very special place in my heart. And also, like, I have some background and things in teaching, and I know how challenging that job is. And so, like, I have so much appreciation for you and like the amount of love and energy that you like pour into these kiddos. So I'm like really excited to hear about how you got to where you are.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to get to share. I know I've shared a little bit with you guys in the past, but I'm like excited just to kind of for the whole story. Honestly, even for my own like remembering the process.
Yeah.
Because it's like sometimes, you just get caught up in the day to day and kind of forget the overall process. And you're like, oh, right. Like
it reminds you how good God is.
Exactly.
Like, oh, I remember like seeing and like sometimes you have to kind of talk it out, like to see his hand through the whole thing.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So should I just go on and start from the
tell us how it started, where it began.
Yeah. So I'm like, I'll start from the very beginning.
Perfect.
But basically, God gifted me with the ability to work well with children and just like enjoying, like I've babysat and worked with kids for as long as I can remember. I decided, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to college for it. Like, this is what I'm going to do. I did a American Sign Language degree first. But I knew, I was like, okay, teaching is really, really the passion that God's always given me. So it's like, even though like I kind of got derailed a little bit on that for a minute with the interpreting, it's funny because it like ultimately I'm like another derailment that kind of led back to what God really had for me. But got through that. I got a job right out of college, like literally like was at my student teaching. And I was like, hey, I'm not going to be here the next day because I'm going to a job fair. And they were like, hey, like you normally don't get jobs that way, just so you know. Like my mentor teacher, like literally just kindly, but was just trying to like literally landed close to what I would say my dream job was. It was in the exact grade level I wanted. It was right on the edge of like how far I wanted to be from where I was living at the time. And I was like, oh, like fantastic. I start working there, it goes well. It's a public school. So there's, the challenges that go along with that, especially being a Christian, but like it was actually going overall well. I was kind of working up, in my team. I'm one of those people that there's a little bit of the set it and forget it type of mentality where it's like, okay, I'm in this, I got this, like I'm going to be a fifth grade teacher forever. Like just like in it. And I'm like, okay, like I'm going to retire from it. Like I'm going to be, maybe I'm one of those people that literally doesn't change grade levels even.
Yeah. You thought that was it for you.
Yeah. As I'm like working up, I became, team lead on our fifth grade team. So it's like, I'm even working up in leadership. I'm like, hey, maybe like when I was a kid, I wanted to become a principal. And I was like, well, maybe I'll work towards that. No, I'm good with where I'm at, and just kind of had like settled.
Yeah.
And like different things happened, including COVID and being forced into, teaching online and just all the different craziness that went along with that in the teaching world. And I had already right before that had started going, hey, something doesn't feel right. And like things just started not like gelling well when I was at work, and just like things like I'm like, hey, something's not working. I'm like, I have everything lined up. Everything looks perfect for the foreseeable future, but I can't do this anymore. And I'm like,
well, it strikes me. You said like I had settled in, right? And it's like we get in our mind these like plans and like we feel settled, and God's like, no, I don't want you to settle there too nicely.
Right.
Like it's I've got bigger, better, whatever different plans for you.
Exactly. Well, and honestly, that's the thing. Like I had totally settled in. I had actually forgot that God had given me a word years and years before of that I was actually going to run a school out of my church.
Oh, wow.
And like had totally just like pushed that off to the side, and I was like, nope, I'm set. Like I have predictable income, these different things are, set up for me. Like I'm a single person, so it's like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Um to like have that predictability and have all that just kind of set.
Isn't that
And
funny
so
how we can like totally like black out something like that? Like sometimes I read of that happening in the Bible and I'm like, how did they forget that like Jesus said that or like they've been given this word and then it's like, oh no, we literally do that all the time. Like you were just like moving along with your life, like that wasn't even a thought.
Yeah.
exactly.
Or it's
Yeah.
I
like the doubt, you start doubting, like maybe that really wasn't him. Maybe that was,
Yes.
maybe we made that up, or I made that up, or whatever. The
Mhm.
person made
Totally.
that up, or whatever it is. And he's like, no. It's
Yeah.
like,
So did he
oh,
remind you of it or was
He
that later
did.
on?
So, I mean, it was kind of like a mixture. So it's like timeline wise, it was kind of they all kind of started lining up together. I got to a point where I was so frustrated with teaching that I literally like I told my principal, like I told people around me, I'm like, I'm done. And I'm not done with like here, I'm done. Like I
Wow.
am leaving teaching. This is like I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
wow.
And so I was actually looking, I'm like, I like data entry stuff. Like I like randomly, putting stuff in. I'm like, well, maybe I'll go do that. Like maybe I'll go do a secretary job. I was like looking for anything that was like not going to be like totally like not a big like career jump, but at the same time, like something that could be sustainable still.
Yeah.
But I was done. I did not want to work with kids anymore. I was like, I'm done.
Mm.
Through all of
Can I ask, like, was it the kids or was it like the environment and
it,
the struggles of teaching?
it was more of the struggles of teaching within the environment. Um, and honestly, like, so I also, the same time I had been teaching, I also was the children's director for my church.
Mm.
Mhm.
And I had done both at the same time. Um, and at that time, I didn't have good personal boundaries
Mm.
with
Yeah.
work or with church. And it's just something I've grown more in. Because I learned the hard way. But at that point, like I was already not being the children's director, but at the same time, like still doing the teaching. And with all of it, I was just burnt out
Mm.
with how I had currently been doing it. And it was
Yeah.
just one of those things that, I could not go on as it was. And what that looked like to me in the moment was I obviously this isn't what God had for me forever. So
Mm.
it worked for now and I'm just out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I felt peace at leaving. Like I was like, yeah, like I feel like God's okay with me leaving. So like I literally, I think in October told my principal I'm not coming back next year.
Wow.
Um and endured the next until May of, are you sure? Can I make you stay?
Oh,
Um
I'm sure. Yeah.
and because I'm like, not to, I'm like, I don't like talking like feel where I feel like I'm bragging, but I'm like, I was a good
You're a
like
fantastic teacher, Alicia. You're an amazing teacher.
but like,
Like
I
that's
knew I was a good asset on their team. Like,
yes.
it wasn't like it was significant for him to lose me, especially at that point. And just like our team dynamic and stuff like that. So I'm like, I knew and like and he sent me off well wishes. Like I still have a good relationship with him. Like, I wish them well. It's just like in the teaching environment, I'm like, I can't talk about Jesus when these kids are coming in with life issues that are huge and way more than any fifth grader should be dealing with. I can't bring the one thing I know brings
Mm.
answers. And I'm like, I can't do that anymore. And I'm being asked to do all these random, in my opinion, random things that public school teachers get put on. And it's like, how is this helping the kids? How is this helping me better myself to help the kids? And it's like, there's so much extra stuff that it's just like, I can't really teach. I can't really focus on what I need to. And I'm just over all of it because I'm like, at this point, their behavior is, off the walls and I can't do much about it. And it's just, I'm over it.
Yeah. It's too much.
Yeah. And so at that point, I had a friend who had done a Prenda school. And so she, had through all the craziness with COVID and just had kind of started that.
And for anyone who doesn't know what Prenda is, it's basically like a little micro school, and they kind of give you the format, and I think they give you curriculums or
Yes,
something.
yeah.
And so it's essentially like a franchised micro school almost.
Yeah. But within that, it's still, I believe, because I wasn't directly a part of it, so I don't have all the details, but I believe it was still labeled under the charter school, like licensing.
Mm.
And so within that, for those of you that don't know, like it's still under that public. And so like you get really limited still of what you can talk about with Jesus and all the things. So at that point, she was ready to kind of move it fully into the church and just kind of, we were like, okay, we want to fully come into like what we were meant to do. And so that's where I was like, okay, if we're under the church, then I'm like full in, like that's kind of when that kind of word from the Lord kind of came back and was like, hey, this is actually what you're called to do. And specifically with the people that I'm currently with, like, it's like, this is the church, this is, the team that it was meant to be. So at that point, it was actually started morphing into what it is now, which is actually a ministry of the church, where we're able to help families that, maybe like more of the like homeschool, like smaller environment, like type of learning, but we still have some of the structure that you would have from going to a more traditional school. So it's just being able to kind of come along and kind of create what God actually has for the kids, and being able to incorporate, worship into our days, and being able to incorporate like checking in with our hearts and just like, hey, you're having a hard time with this math problem. Like, is it really the math problem right now? And sometimes it is. But sometimes it's like, no, I actually like, my sister just said something mean to me. And it's like, okay, let's
We're clearly talking about my children.
Was that Lily?
Like, to be fair, there's no exact examples of math class during that. But we run it as a one-room schoolhouse. So it's like we have mixed ages in the same class. So we actually have a couple sets of siblings in the same room. So it's this ability to be able to kind of have the kids learn how to do life more than just doing school. And it's like how to communicate well with kids that are older and younger, and just being able to, in all of this, all foundationed and like put back on Jesus. And it's like, where are we learning everything from? And to honestly, if God would not have allowed me to get pushed to the point where I'm like, I'm out, I'm done, like, I can't stand this anymore, I like hate going to work, I don't think I would be here now. Like, there was times.
Isn't that how it works? He just pushes you to your absolute limit where you're like, okay, God, whatever you've got,
exactly. And there was times like back then I was like, oh yeah, like I would remember the word, because you were talking about earlier, like, would you remember it? And it's like, yeah, I would occasionally, but it was like, oh, that's for later. Oh, that's for later. And it's like, I probably would have been 50, 6 years old, and I'm like, well, maybe I should do that now. And it's like, no, it's like, God's timing is so important. And so like on it. And honestly, like I wasn't in a spot to hear at that time. And so it was like, God was like, okay, I'm going to help you here. Let's just push you out of your comfort zone so that you're willing to make a jump that seemed really scary. Yeah. I left a secure income. I left, a secure job. Like, public school teachers, you have to do a lot to get kicked out of your job.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I left a secure job to go to something where I didn't know if I would get paid. And just like, and it definitely was a different income bracket than I had been working in. And so it was just a matter of like, trusting God to do it. And God has been faithful. And like, it's incredible to just see like the growth in myself, and just kind of coming into like what God has actually called me to do, and what, he's kind of put in me a long time ago, that he's slowly like, hey, what about this part? Hey, what about that part? In aspects that would have never happened if I would have stayed in public school.
Yeah.
And just stayed in that career path.
Were you, so I know where you currently live. how did the like living situation get impacted by you having to like leave jobs?
That's still a conversation me and Jesus have frequently because it's hilarious. So I like basically lived in the North Valley, worked in the West Valley for a long time. So it was like a solid 30-minute drive to work when I was in public school. I finally moved 5 minutes away from the school I was working at. And I was there a year and a half longer and then started working back up on the north side. So then I was going the opposite commute.
Oh my gosh.
Almost exactly.
Wow.
And that's still where I live. It's like, again, it's another God story for a different day. But amazing like situation for what I have, and just what the situation is right now. So I'm like, all right, God, I'm like, I keep asking for another situation like that, like closer to work so that I don't have to drive as far. But at the same time, I'm like, I can't, like, his favor has been all over all the things. So it's like, if I wasn't living where I'm at right now, doing what I'm doing would not be as possible, just with all the pieces to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, I think it's so interesting that like obviously like God had to line everything up. So like we're talking about thwarted plans, right? But those like are our ideas of plans. Like there weren't really any thwarted plans. Like God had you every single step of the way,
Yeah.
and he was always leading you down a path. So it's like your plans were derailed, but God's sure weren't. He knew exactly where he was taking you and exactly how you were going to get there and exactly how long it was going to take to happen.
Yeah.
And he had just lined everything up so that you could make that leap and have the people and have the resources, and they would be ready when you were ready, and then boom, so that it's all lined up. And only God can do that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
For sure. Well, so I think I have to like tell my story briefly of how we came to find you guys, because it is also a God in the grocery aisle thing. So when Abby was going into kindergarten, we had the question of like, where do we send her? And we knew public school was off, like not on the table for us because of where we live and the schools around us and all of that. And we wanted a Christian education for our kids, and we talked about the idea of homeschooling, but it would have been, of course, me homeschooling. And my children don't take instruction from me well, and I'm not the most patient human in the world. And so that just felt like not the best option. And so I actually like had this crazy idea of I'm going to start a school, and I want like Abby's very extroverted and she loves people and she loves her friends, and recess is her favorite subject, and Lily too, but especially Abby. And so we really wanted them to not only have instruction from someone who wasn't me, but to have the social aspect that they obviously wouldn't have gotten homeschooling, or there's co-ops and there's homeschool groups and whatever, but we really wanted them to have more of that structured time and more of the like peer group situation happening, and all of that, some fun stuff. And so I had this brilliant idea of I'm going to start a school, I'm going to start a micro school, and hire a teacher, because I'm not a teacher and I don't want to be a teacher. Hire a teacher to teach, and then I can run the operations side. Had no clue what I was doing, but I was like, if God called me to it, it's possible, gonna make it happen. So I actually got to the point of starting to recruit students. I had like gone through kind of figuring out how to put all of it together and curriculum and all of that, and really felt like I was flying by the seat of my pants. But I had interviewed teachers and found one that I was planning on hiring, whole 9 yards. And then when we very first started looking, I had found a little micro school here, and I had called her, and she had a wait list, and she was like, but here's a couple others that you could potentially look at. And you guys were one of them. And for some reason, I had looked at your website, and the only explanation I have was that it was a God thing, because I just like, for some reason, was like, I don't think that's exactly what we're looking for. Which is crazy now, like crazy that was my thought looking back. But for some reason, that was my thought. And so got through this whole thing of like trying to set this school up. And there was just something that like kept nagging at me. And I went back to your guys' website and I was like, why did I ever think that this was not what I was looking for? And so we called you and set up an interview and talked to you guys. And Jared and I were actually in Texas with Mark and Chelsea when I talked to you guys. And we were driving someplace far away, and on the way back to their house, we were talking about it, and I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm so far down this road. Like, I've already like kind of given a verbal agreement to this girl that we're going to hire. But like, it's already here. It's already made. Like, everything that we're looking for is like, even down to, we were going to do 4 days a week and you guys are 4 days a week. Right. And it was just like, everything that I had been looking for, it already existed. And so we talked about it, and we were finally like, there's a lot of risk over here. This already exists. We're going to go with the less risky option. And it was a God thing. Like, you guys have been such a godsend for us, and you are just amazing. And we love you, and our children love you. And so yeah, it's just crazy. Like, we've talked in a few episodes about how like God just weaves these stories together. And like, I'm sitting here listening to your story of how like you almost weren't here, and like we almost weren't here, and yet like God just lined up all the pieces. Yeah. And it's just been amazing for us. And hearing like your story, and just how perfectly, like, seeing you in your natural element, I will say, and like with these kids, and just how much you love them and care for them. And I just can't imagine you anywhere else. It's just amazing to see. So yeah,
it's like, I'm glad, because I can't imagine me anywhere else now either.
Yeah it's amazing how God lines things up.
It's interesting. It's cool. Go ahead.
Oh, I knew part of your story. I didn't realize how far along in the process you guys were.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. It was nuts. That there's a lot more to the story, but that was like the nutshell version of it. So
yeah. What I was going to say is that it's interesting how, like, cause you were so far along, and you had really invested a lot of time into like figuring that out. Yeah. And sometimes we don't really ever know why God took us down a path. Like, we can look at Alicia's story and say like, okay, here were all the things, and here's God's fingerprints all over it. And now here you are. And like, Brianne, you can say the same, like, here's God's fingerprints, but it's sort of like, why the detour? Why the derailing? Yeah. And there's still kind of, I think, that question. And sometimes we don't ever get an answer, but we can just have faith that it was for a reason, whether that was for your benefit or the girl's benefit who you're talking to, or, just for the timing to work out. Like, we don't really know, but we can just have faith that like it did happen for a reason. And like, he did line the pieces up. And because we hear stories like Alicia, where you can really clearly put the pieces together to get you, to the end, we know that even when some of the pieces like maybe don't seem to quite fit, like God's hand was still in it, which is
for sure. Well, and I think that there was a lot more to why God allowed that. But one of the things, the one thing I will say is I had such a peace, like it's a different model. It's such a different model. And as a parent, like, that was a little bit of a leap to be like, no, we're going to do something different with our kids. We're not going to send them to a traditional model school, even, whether a private school or a charter school or whatever. Like, it's something completely different than that. And I had such a peace that was what needed to happen when I looked at you guys and was like, it's literally to a T what I had planned to build. Like, this is what God has for us. This is where, this is what he wants for us. And it just gave me such a peace of mind. So I don't think that was like the answer, the only answer, but certainly it was a takeaway for me from it.
Yeah. Awesome. Alicia, do you like looking back at your story, would you change the way you did things? Would you have done anything differently?
I probably would have thrown a little less of a fit when I felt the leading to leave the public school. Like, it was a few months of like, being quite frustrated with teaching in general. I wish I would have
Mm,
transitioned out a little easier. But overall, no. Like, I still would have, been in every position that I was in, and like, you know, starting something new, there's ups and downs of all of it, and just learning along the way with different things. And honestly, like, I wouldn't change any of it because it all brings us to where we're at now. And
yeah.
like, and it all pieces together, lessons learned, and, just different people coming alongside and different things. It's like, that's the thing, is like, when you move any of those pieces, it's like you never know what the domino effect would have been.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I trust that God allowed for everything to kind of fall as it did. You know, would I have liked to listen a little faster? That that's probably the only change.
Yeah, but I think what you're saying is still true even in that regard, that like if the timing had have even been a little bit different, maybe the whole thing looks different, you know? So maybe
Right.
he let you stay in that struggle for a bit because like that's how long it needed to take for everything to line up. And I love that you're saying that you wouldn't change anything because even if you take away one piece, like it doesn't get you here. Because I think sometimes when you're still in the middle of it, it's really hard to see that. And it's like sometimes you
Mhm.
can still look back. Like I'm thinking about myself, and when I moved to Texas, I had a teaching job lined up that I was like, it was my dream teaching job. It's what I had wanted for so long. And there are still times where I think about that and I'm like, man, what would that have been like if we stayed? You know, and I know God called us here to Texas. I know that, but that is always something that lingers in my mind of like, that could have been so awesome and so cool. And it's hard to let that go, you know? But like,
Mhm.
so I think sometimes when you haven't seen the whole thing come to fruition yet, there's like this question of
Mhm.
like, would I change it? You know, but like you're saying, if you change it, it doesn't get you to where he was taking you. So I think that's so
Yeah.
reassuring.
Yeah.
So, if you could give a piece of advice to somebody who is maybe feeling like their plans are falling apart or their plans are getting derailed, what would that be?
Honestly, like, take everything to Jesus, like, first and foremost. And it's just, follow the peace, because it's like ultimately like
Mm.
that's what led me to where I'm at.
Mm,
The lack of peace um is what pushed me out, and the finding peace and like, hey, I can actually, teach about Jesus, and I can do these things. And like, honestly, like, I mentioned it before, but like leaving a secure job as a single female and like stepping out into something where I had no guaranteed paycheck. That's huge. And the piece that was on that was incredible.
Yeah.
So it's like, even if you don't, have a direct word, because at that time I wasn't fully, I guess I was aware of, but I wasn't fully processing my like word from seriously like tons of years ago.
yeah.
um, But like, it was just like, oh, there's a lot of peace on this to do it, and it doesn't make any sense. And if it doesn't make any logical sense, because I like logic. And so when it doesn't make any logical sense, but there's so much peace on it, I'm like, how can I not?
Mhm.
So just follow the peace, is,
I
my
love that.
biggest thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
That's
such
awesome.
great advice. And I think I was just having this conversation about like what obedience means and when we're obedient just purely out of love for the Lord or because we're like looking for some blessing. And I had the question of like, what about when we're obedient because we're just trying to like get away from the anxious feeling of not being obedient? Like, is that love of the Lord or is that something different, you know? But I think like you're putting it in such a good way that it's like follow the peace, and the peace is Jesus. So ultimately, what
Mhm.
you're saying is follow Jesus. And that is out of love. And like, because he loves us, he lets our souls get stirred in these ways to not
Mhm.
have the peace so that we turn back to him and stay focused
Yeah.
on where we're supposed to be. So that's amazing advice and such a great way of like summing that up. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you want to add to your story that you haven't shared?
That is the main overall of just the whole process, and just, how I got to where I am, and, you know, grateful for the blessing of just, honestly grateful for the blessing of getting to do something that, like you said, is totally, it's outside the box. It's not, how I even got to this point is just, of how to teach and how to interact with the kids in a totally different than traditional way. Um, that was its own process. And it's really cool to just kind of let God walk me through that process, even just so that we can, help the kids grow to their highest potential. And like, that's my ultimate, goal in life, is to have the kids that I work with to just grow to their highest potential, not only academically, but specifically, spiritually and emotionally, just become, the best humans they can be before they leave, working with me, and then to just go on and be amazing humans.
Yeah, and what a great way of saying, and not that you were saying this, but ultimately what you're doing is so much bigger than any of us sitting here can even see, because you're impacting these little people who are going to go on to impact people who are going to go on to impact people. And like, your ripple is just huge, and you'll probably never even know, you'll probably never even know how big that is. But just these steps and obedience has like created this huge impact, which is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I can certainly say that. I mean, my kids are little, so they're still growing and changing every single day, but I can see the impact that you've had on them, and it's just it's amazing. It's
Yeah, I can too, on them, on my nieces. It is really amazing to see. Okay, well, I want to end with another verse from Proverbs. It's 16:9, and it says, "The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." And I think that's so applicable to what you're saying, because he took you each step along the way, and you thought you had this plan and you were going to stay there forever, and that was your thing, but he was just stepping you along to get you to his destination. And he might have another one for you. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see where things take you. But yeah, he's got you where he wants you.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing your story and just letting us, in on that. Brianne, do you want to end us with a prayer?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for Alicia's story. I thank you for leading her every step of the way. And I thank you for her obedience to follow, even when it was uncertain. And thank you for giving her your peace that surpasses all understanding. Lord, I just thank you for the work that she is doing in the lives of these little children and the lives of their families. I can attest. And I thank you for her. And I just pray that you would bless all of our listeners as they hear her story, and that your words and your message would be heard through this podcast. And I praise you and I thank you for your goodness. Lord God, you are just so amazing with how you weave stories together and how you guide us and direct our steps. And even when our lives look topsy-turvy, you always have a plan, and it always comes to fruition. And I just thank you and praise you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. Well, thank you, listeners. Thank you, Alicia. We'll see you next
Yeah,
time.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.